Bueno, Fonteno Cave Broken Leg Rescue. On December 14th, 2024, a 32-year-old Italian caver named Ottavia Piana entered a deep cave system near the town of Bueno Fonteno in northern Italy. The cave sat beneath the mountains near Lake Iseo, northeast of the city of Bergamo. Ottavia was an experienced speleologist, a scientist who studies caves. She was not there as a tourist. She was mapping an uncharted branch of the cave that no one had ever explored before. Deep underground, in a part of the cave that had no name, Ottavia lost her footing. She fell 5 meters down a rocky drop. The impact fractured her leg, cracked several ribs, and broke bones in her face. She could not stand. She could not crawl. She was stranded in a dark, wet cave where the temperature sat at just 8 degrees Celsius. Her companions climbed back to the surface and called for help. The Italian Alpine Rescue Service launched a massive rescue operation. Around 100 specialist rescuers were sent to the cave. But getting Ottavia out was going to be a nightmare. The cave was a maze of narrow tunnels and tight passages, some barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. One section was a 100-meter bottleneck, so narrow that a stretcher could not fit. The rescue teams had to use drills, hammers, and even small explosives to widen the rock so the stretcher could pass. Only 20 rescuers were allowed inside the cave at any time because the tunnels were so small. Medics set up a heated base camp deep inside the cave to keep Ottavia alive. They gave her oxygen, medicine, and warm air while the team slowly cleared the route ahead. Hour after hour, day after day, the rescuers chipped away at the rock and inched the stretcher forward. 75 hours after her fall, Ottavia Piana was finally carried out of the cave entrance in the early morning darkness. She was rushed to hospital with multiple fractures, but she was alive. But here's the part of the story that shocked Italy. This was not the first time Ottavia had been rescued from this exact same cave. Just 17 months earlier, in July 2023, she had fallen in another part of the Bueno Fonteno cave system. That rescue took 40 hours and involved a similar army of rescuers. After being rescued twice from the same cave, some people in Italy called her reckless. But the head of the rescue team defended her. He said Ottavia had the right equipment, the right training, and the right knowledge to be in that cave. Caves are unpredictable, he said. Even the best explorers can fall. Ottavia herself said she had no regrets. She was exploring the unknown, and that is what cavers do. McBrides Cave Broken Leg Flood Rescue. In 1997, a veteran caver named Gerald Mani entered McBride's Cave in the hills of northern Alabama with a small group of friends. Gerald had over 30 years of caving experience. He was one of the original explorers of this cave and knew it better than almost anyone. McBride's Cave was a wet cave, a long system of pits, tunnels, and underground streams that flowed through the mountain. The plan was simple. Enter through the upper entrance, travel through the cave, and exit through the lower entrance. But when the group entered the cave, the weather above ground changed fast. A flash flood hit the mountains and sent a wall of water crashing down through the cave system. Within minutes, the normally calm underground streams turned into raging rivers. The water rose so fast that some passages were nearly sealed to the ceiling. At the 8th drop in the cave, a 23-foot pit, the floodwater was pouring down like a waterfall. Gerald grabbed what he thought was the main rope to descend the pit. But in the chaos of the rushing water, he grabbed only one of the 2 ropes he needed. He lost his grip and fell. The fall smashed his thigh bone and his femur like a toothpick. Gerald crashed onto a narrow ledge partway down the pit, screaming in pain, with freezing floodwater hammering down on him from above. A few members of the group managed to fight through the flooded lower passages and escape to the surface. The rest stayed with Gerald in the dark, holding him on the ledge as the water kept rising. Rescue teams were called, but they could not enter the cave. The water levels were too dangerous. For hours, the teams sat at the entrance and waited for the flood to go down. Inside the cave, Gerald lay in freezing water for over 12 hours. His body temperature was dropping fast. When the water finally dropped low enough, the rescue teams entered the cave. They waded through chest-deep water in total darkness, knowing that another surge could drown them all. They reached Gerald on the ledge, barely conscious and shaking from the cold. Getting him out was brutal. Every movement had to be made through flooded tunnels with water still inches from the ceiling. 18 hours after his fall, Gerald Mani was finally pulled to the surface, alive. Doctors treated him for hypothermia and a badly broken leg. He missed 2 months of work. Then he went back to caving. Gerald said that 30 years underground had taught him one rule. The cave always wins when the water comes. Ogof, Ffynnon Broken Leg Rescue. On November 6, 2021, a 38-year-old caver named George Linnane from Bristol entered one of the deepest caves in Britain. The cave was called Ogof Ffynnon, meaning the Cave of the Black Spring. It sat beneath the Brecon Beacons Mountains in South Wales. The cave system was over 50 kilometers long and plunged nearly 300 meters below the surface. George was an experienced caver. He had explored this cave many times before, but on this day, he put his foot in the wrong place. He slipped and fell 15 meters down a rocky slope. The fall shattered his leg. It also broke his jaw and his sternum, the bone in the center of his chest. He had spinal injuries as well. George could not move, and he was lying deep inside the mountain, surrounded by darkness and freezing water. His companions raised the alarm, and the South and Mid Wales Cave Rescue Team arrived within hours. But when the first rescuers reached George, they realized how bad the situation was. He was over a mile underground in a part of the cave full of narrow tunnels, steep climbs, underground rivers, and waterfalls. A stretcher could not fit through the shortest exit. The only way out was through the main streamway, a long, brutal route full of water and boulders. The rescue team called for backup. Over the next 54 hours, nearly 300 volunteer rescuers from across Britain arrived to help. At least 8 different cave rescue teams took part. Some of the rescuers had worked on the Thai cave rescue in 2018. They formed a human chain inside the cave, passing George on a stretcher through flowing streams, over slippery boulders, and up narrow shafts. The teams worked in shifts around the clock, each group carrying George a little further toward the surface. A special communication system called CaveLink was used to send messages between teams underground and coordinators on the surface. Every inch of progress was hard-won. The cave fought them at every turn with water, cold, and tight spaces. After 54 straight hours, George Linnane's stretcher finally broke through the surface on a foggy Monday night. The crowd of rescuers erupted into cheers and applause. The fog was too thick for a helicopter, so a Land Rover drove him to the nearest hospital. George survived with serious but non-life-threatening injuries. The rescue was the longest stretcher carry in British cave rescue history. Lechuguilla Cave Rockfall Burial. On March 31, 1991, a 40-year-old expert caver named Emily Davis Mobley was 2 miles deep inside the longest and deepest cave in the United States. The cave was Lechuguilla, hidden in a remote wilderness area of Carlsbad Caverns National Park in southeastern New Mexico. Lechuguilla stretched for over 54 miles of mapped passages and plunged 1,565 feet below the desert surface. A tangled labyrinth of enormous chambers, razor-sharp formations, and terrifying vertical drops. It was closed to the public and only accessible to a handful of highly trained cave explorers approved by the National Park Service. Emily was one of those elite cavers. She had been exploring caves since 1969 and had over 2 decades of experience underground. She was part of a 5-person mapping expedition, documenting new passages in one of the most spectacular cave systems on Earth. On that March morning, about 1,000 feet below the surface, Emily was climbing a steep slope when she reached up and grabbed a large boulder to pull herself higher. The boulder, weighing between 80 and 100 pounds, broke free from the wall without warning. Emily fell 12 feet down the slope, and the massive rock followed her down and slammed directly into her left leg just below the knee. The impact shattered her tibia and left her pinned to the ground in excruciating pain, 2 miles from the cave entrance and nearly 1,000 feet underground. Her teammates rushed to her side and splinted her leg as best they could with the limited supplies they had. But getting Emily out of Lechuguilla was going to be one of the most difficult cave rescues ever attempted in America. The path to the surface involved narrow crawlways, boulder fields with gaping holes, and vertical cliff faces that would need to be scaled with ropes and pulleys. One section alone, a 40-foot-wide chasm called Freakout Traverse with a 100-foot drop below, would require Emily to be suspended on a rope and pulled across while strapped to a stretcher. Another section was a 250-foot slope called the Great White Way that took rescuers an entire day just to haul her up. Word of the accident spread through the caving community, and within hours, expert cave rescuers from across the United States began converging on Carlsbad. More than 200 people would eventually be involved in the operation. Over 100 experienced cavers underground, and another 100 support workers on the surface. Many of the underground rescuers had 10 to 20 years of caving experience, and they needed every bit of it. Emily refused to be treated like a helpless victim. Even with a shattered leg, she dragged herself through the easier sections of the cave, using her arms and her one good leg. When she could not move on her own, the rescue teams carried her on a specially rigged stretcher through passages that were barely wide enough for one person. At one point, rescuers used a system of ropes and pulleys to slide Emily across the freak-out traverse, a 100-foot drop yawning below her as she hung in the darkness. Despite the pain and the fear, Emily kept her spirits high throughout the entire ordeal. She joked with her rescuers, gave them advice on technique, and at one point even asked them to deliver pizza underground. The rescue took 4 full days, 91 hours from the moment the rock hit her leg to the moment she emerged from the cave entrance. When her stretcher finally poked up through the opening of Lechuguilla just after 1 o'clock in the morning, Emily looked up at the sky and sang out.